This man really needs no introduction in an Elixir conference. It's the creator himself, José Valim.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing? So I'll share my screen so I can get this started. It's always a lottery because it just says screen 1 and screen 2. I need to make sure I'm sharing the correct one. And let's see this. All right, I think that's the correct one. And I hope you can see the slides, not the presenter notes, the slides. If not, somebody please join on audio and let me know. All right, so thanks for having me here. Thanks for organizing the event. I'm here to talk about the Elixir updates for Elixir 1.12 that was just released, and also leave plenty of time for questions, hopefully, so we can talk about things that whatever's on your mind, really. So this talk is exclusively about the Elixir 1.12. As I said, it was just released 2 weeks ago. We've had throughout Elixir history more than 1,000 contributors, which is amazing. And I always like to add information, right, about HexPM, how the number of packages are growing, how the number of downloads are growing. We have crossed 4 billion packages, 4 billion packages downloads. And yeah, but the bulk of the talk is not about the statistics. It's about the features in Elixir 1.12. So we're going to cover a couple topics. We're going to talk about the scripting improvements in Elixir 1.12. We're going to talk about the Erlang OTP24 integration. We're going to talk about stepped ranges, other general improvements, and some community improvements as well. Okay, so let's get started. Scripting improvements. So Elixir, from the beginning, was designed to be a language good for scripting, up to the point that we do have an extension called EXS that stands for Elixir scripts, right? And we do use Elixir scripts every day. Mix.install is an Elixir script, right? And by being a script, it means it doesn't write any bin file to disk. So Mix.install is an Elixir script. All your tests, they are Elixir scripts. So we are working with scripts every day. But when I was talking with other people or seeing some discussions online, I would hear people say, Elixir is my main language, but when I have to write a script, I don't use Elixir. And I mean, scripts are like personal use, right? Maybe you want to do something very quick. And then I thought that was interesting. And then I started to talk, to collect feedback. And people point out that there are a couple issues that were kind of limiting them for using Elixir as their own scripts. And those issues, they were lack of dependency management, lack of conveniences to trap signals, and buffered I/O. And so lack of dependency management means that you can't use dependencies in your scripts, right? Lack of convenience to trap signals is that it's not straightforward for you to say, hey, when the user sends a secret signal, I want to do this. And buffered I/O, this is actually a VM property. It means that every time you write so when the Erlang VM is running, if you write anything on the terminal, right, the Erlang VM is going to always read that, even if you never use, even if nobody's saying, hey, read from I/O. So that's why, for example, if you're like me that like to say, you run mix test, and then while the tests are running, you're typing the other command, right? If you do that, when the tests finish, your command is not going to be there because the VM actually read it, but you didn't use it for anything. So that's because the VM is always buffering the I/O, and that's why you shouldn't do pipe the yes command to the Erlang VM. So sometimes people would say, yes mix.get, because what yes does is that every time somebody wants to read something, it writes yes, but because the VM buffers everything, the VM is just going to, you have a script that is going to be giving yes all the time, and then the VM is going to be buffering everything, and then you're just going to, if you leave that running long enough, you're going to run out of memory. So those are the issues that were raised. And we actually addressed the first two on Elixir 1.12, and the other ones to be addressed within the VM, so it's a longer conversation. But the first two has been addressed in this release. And the lack of dependency management, the way we addressed it was by introduction of Mix.install. So now in your scripts, you can call Mix.install at the top. And what that's going to do is that it's going to install the dependencies that you give to it. And I really like Mix.install because I think it's a very good compromise to what we see in other languages. So in Elixir, we always had dependencies, right? We always had packages. I mean, since before 1.0. But we never had global packages, global dependencies, because we always wanted to avoid that. Because if you have a script that depends on a global dependency, and that global dependency is updated, what is going to happen, right? Like maybe our script no longer works, or maybe you want to share your script with somebody, or maybe you change your machines, right? So it's not very productive to be depending on the system stuff, right? System dependencies, global dependencies. And Mix.install is a very good compromise where you can still have scripts, but you are listing all the dependencies that you need up front and up top. So that's the idea here. And you can use it for scripts. And a month ago, we announced something called Livebook. And you can also use Mix.install on Livebook, for example. So if you want to have like reproducible code notebooks and install the dependencies, you can use Mix.install as well. So already two good use cases for this new functionality. The other functionality that we added, again, now related to the trap signal stuff, is that we added system trap signal. So it's a very simple API where you can tell which signal you want to trap. You can give it an anonymous function, and when the VM receives that signal, it's going to execute the code in the given function. And here's an example of us using this new functionality in XUnit. So in XUnit now, if you send a sigquit, which is control and the backslash, it will imagine that, for example, you're running the test and your suite gets stuck. By default, we have a timeout of 30 seconds, which means you have to wait 30 seconds for it to print what failed. Now, if you have a fast suite and something got stuck, you know immediately, right? Like, hey, something got stuck, right? Maybe I have an infinite loop or something wrong happened. So you can just hit control and backslash, and it's going to print the tasks that were running at the time and that were not completed. So a very nice usage of this new functionality. All right, those are the script improvements. And now let's talk about the next point, which is Erlang OTP 24. So Elixir 1.12 has tight integration with Erlang OTP 24 in a couple different areas. So before we talk about those things, let's talk about the main features from the perspective of the stock in Erlang OTP 24. Okay, so the biggest one for sure is being JIT. In my experience, like things compile about 30 to 40% faster, so you should get faster compilation times. People are reporting faster runtimes in production as well. So this is all great. Erlang OTP 24 also has like general improvements to the compiler. So for example, I wrote a blog post about this. So for example, if you have like a large getText module, there are some really nice improvements in there. Or other large modules like a router, for example, the Phoenix router. So improvements to the compiler, there are improvements to code evaluation. It also introduced half floats on binary comprehensions. And Erlang OTP 24 also implements something that we call EP54. EP stands for Erlang Enhancement Proposal. Is how we usually describe larger features to Erlang. It needs to go through this proposal process. And there is one numbered 54, which I'm going to talk about. Right, so the good news here is that in order for you to benefit from being JIT and improvements to the compiler, you don't have to do anything. You just need to update your Erlang version, even if you are using the latest Elixir 1.11, for example. You don't need to do anything. But improvements to code evaluation and the other features, you're going to need Elixir 1.12. Improvements to code evaluation is an improvement that if you have a lot of variables in the code that you are evaluating, it would become linearly slower, the evaluation in Erlang and in Elixir. And we have improved that, so it's no longer linear. And the place where this matters is templates, like Phoenix templates and EX templates. They are compiled like 99% of the time. But if for some reason you have to evaluate something, now it's much faster. So just to give you an idea, like the Phoenix generators, they evaluate the templates because we don't want to compile, the generator code that you run only on development like once in a lifetime, right? So the Phoenix generators, all the templates, they are all evaluated again because we don't need to compile them, and the evaluation time was fast enough because again, you just call it like once per day or maybe twice per day, right? And if it takes 1 second instead of like 100 milliseconds, not really a big problem. But the issue is that in Phoenix Test Suite, because we need to test all the templates, we are evaluating it all the time, right? So just so you have an idea, running the Elixir Test Suite, the Phoenix Test Suite in using the previous Erlang versions and previous Elixir versions compared to Elixir 1.12 and OTP 24, the times went from more than a minute to 10 seconds. So that's how faster the code evaluation got in those very specific cases where you have a lot of variables, which the templates do. Anyway, what matters here is that it's a nice improvement. It most likely won't affect you because you shouldn't be evaluated code in the first place. But if you are, it's a nice welcome change. The other change in here regarding OTP 24 and Elixir 1.12 is half floats, right? So when we talk about floats, we have different kinds of floats. We have double precision floats, which are 64 bits, and all floats in Elixir, they are double precision floats. And we have single precision floats, which are 32 bits, and we have half precision floats, which are 16 bits. And for all floats in Elixir, there are 64 bits. The precision is relevant when we are serializing those floats, when you're writing those floats to a binary. So in Elixir, for example, if you have a float and you want to serialize it to a binary because you want to send it over the wire, for example, that's how you would do, right? So you have, before, in previous Elixir versions, you could pass the default size, if you say just float and you don't put the -64, would be 64, but you could pass float 32. And now with Elixir 1.12 and OTP 24, you can also pass float -16. But you can say, hey, Jose, okay, when would you ever want to use like half precision floats, right? Why does this matter? And the case where you would use, one of the examples where you would need half precision floats is exactly when the precision is not super important as you would expect, and you would rather save on storage, right? You would rather reduce the size, right, and save on the storage than and reduce the precision related to that. So examples, like a lot of GPU stuff, like if you're doing some video rendering or some graphic rendering, maybe you don't need all that precision in there, right? For like very, a lot of precision on the decimal points. A lot of things regarding with machine learning, it may be completely okay, especially because you maybe work with a really large amount of data. It may be completely okay for it to say, hey, I just want to float 16. I don't need more than that. And that's going to make everything faster, right? Because not only are saving space, is less bits for you to do computations and everything as well. So yeah, so this is a good case that is going to tie in well with Elixir's new use cases for numerical computing and machine learning. And another feature in OTP 24 that we are using in Elixir is the EP54, which stands for Extended Error Information. So I think here showing a picture is the best example I could possibly give. So if you're using OTP 23, so imagine this piece of code where you create an ETS table, you delete the ETS table, and now you try to insert on that ETS table, right? It's going to fail, saying argument error, but it doesn't tell you what went wrong. And in this particular case, two things went wrong, right? Like one, the ETS table no longer exists, so that operation is not going to work. And the second one is that the second argument should be a list or a tuple, okay? In general, a tuple. So if you use EP54 now, if you use OTP 24 and Elixir 1.12 that implements the EP, this is the error message that you get, right? It says errors were found at the given argument. So it goes through all the arguments and tells exactly what went wrong with that part, with each of the arguments if something was wrong with them. So this is a mechanism to extend the error information. It was all implemented by the OTP team about improving the error messages in OTP themselves, and all we had to do in Elixir was to integrate with that. So the work was done all in OTP, and the integration we had to do was very, very small. So kudos to them. And they are adding this error information to all the to Erlang standard library. So in the first version, they type like the kernel, the Erlang module, the ETS module, and I assume that in the next OTP versions, they are going to add more and more information to other modules, which is going to help a lot. All right, that's it, the batch related to OTP 24. Now let's talk about stepped ranges. And stepped ranges is a new feature in Elixir 1.12. And in order to understand why we need stepped ranges, we need to think about, we need to consider some problems. And I have an example problem here, which is the following. Imagine that you want to generate a list of n random numbers between 0 and 1, right? So you could say, okay, I know how to implement this. I'm going to implement it like this. I have a function called random list. This function receives a number n, which needs to be more than or greater than or equal to 0. And you can say, okay, I have a comprehension that is going to generate this list to me, right? I have a comprehension from 1 to n. And for each item in the comprehension, I'm going to call rand uniform. And then we implement the solution. They're like, okay, let's give it a try, right? So we start to say, okay, random list on 3, and then it works. It returns like 3 random numbers it returns a list with 3 elements with 3 random numbers in it. And then you say random list 1, and that works as well, right? It returns a list with 1 random number in it. But if you call random list 0, what is it going to return? It's going to return a list with 2 elements, right? Which is not what we want. And the reason why this happens is because in Elixir, ranges, they can either be increasing or decreasing. And we detect if the range is increasing or decreasing based on the first and the last value, right? So 1 ... 3 is an increasing range from 1 to 3 with 3 elements. Our ranges, they are inclusive. 1 ... 1 is a single element range, right? So it neither increases or decreases, it's a single element range. And 1.0, it's a decreasing range with 2 elements, because now we see that, you know, the ending, the last value is less than the first value. So we say, oh, it's a decreasing range. And this has a very big problem, which is that it's not possible to express empty ranges in Elixir, okay? And that's the main issue here. We cannot express empty ranges. So we addressed, and the reason why we have this problem is because the step of the range, which is if the range should go up or down, and by how much should go up and down, the issue is that it is implicit, right? It's implicitly computed. We don't have control over it. So the idea of stepped ranges is that we are going to make this step explicit, okay? So we are going to say I have the start, I have the stop, and then I have the slash, which kind of looks like a step that is going to tell us, you know, if we should go up or down and by how much. So for example, now stepped ranges, 1 to 3 is step of 1. Sure, it's an increasing range with 3 elements. 1 to 1 with a step of 1 is an increased range with 1 element. And 1 to 0 with a step of 1 is an increasing range with 0 elements, because there's no way I can increase. I'm already above, right? So the idea is that we are going to increase the left side until we are above the right side. So in this case, we have an empty range. So now with stepped ranges, we can actually fix our code, right? Very elegantly. We can say, hey, this is a range from 1 to n with a step of 1. And now everything's going to work as we expect. So stepped ranges means that empty ranges, they are now possible. The step can be any number, any integer, to be more precise, any integer different than 0. And our goal is that in the future I mean like in 2-3 years, when we are going to deprecate the implicit step, so you always need to declare the step. And all ranges will have the default step of 1, probably in a very far away future, and this one like in 10 years, when we release Elixir 2.0. But we're going to deprecate everything before, right? So there's no surprises. But yeah, but the important thing to remember is that, if you're using Elixir 1.12 and you need to have a range and the default step is not 1, it's better to be explicit about it and say, hey, I want a decreasing range, and then you type -1 and so on. All right, and to finish, we have some other general improvements. We have new macros in kernel. So these have been requested by the community so many times, or not necessarily been requested, but has been tried by the community so many times, like different type operators, different approach to the problem. And Elixir now has a official solution for this, which is 2 new kernel macros called tap and then. So tap is going to call the given function, but return the original value that you piped to the function, and then is going to call a given function and return the result of that function. So this code here is equivalent. So some people would write the code that we are seeing here right now. They would write like this, right? Which is not readable at all. And now with those new macros, it feels much better, much more readable what your pipeline is doing. And the cool thing is that Erlang OTP24 can actually optimize this code. So if you use tap and then, it should have like no performance impact, right? In the code whatsoever. It should feel as if you're calling that code sequentially. So that's really, really nice. We also have some improvements in IEx, our interactive Elixir. So one of the improvements now is that if you type like, if you type a function name, right, and then you add a space or you open up the parentheses and you hit tab for autocompletion, it's going to show the possible ways you can call that function. So you can see like showing here zip with. So it's very nice autocompletion improvement. Another improvement in IEx is that now you can actually pipe pipelines. Before, if you try to pipe a pipeline, it would say that the expression is incomplete, but IEx now actually detects that you have a pipeline, so you probably want to pipe to the result of the previous expression. So it does that, okay, which is really cool. So now we can copy and paste pipelines. And what is really nice is that we actually break the pipeline item by item, which can really be good for debugging and try to understand what the pipeline is doing, right? So another great improvement to IEx. And we also, to finish this, we have some community improvements that I want to talk about. So for those who have been following the work on Phoenix Live View, and we even have a blog post, a very recent blog post on Dashbit blog. We are adding a new template language to Live View called HTML+EEx, which stands for HTML+EEx template. So it's basically EX templates, but now we are actually parsing and validating the HTML to make sure you are closing the tags and everything. So, and this new template engine is only possible because of new features in Elixir 1.12, and in particular, a feature that when you are building an EX engine, you have access to the text metadata, so we can parse the HTML correctly. So this is a feature requested by the community, and is going to be very useful for the community that is shipping in Elixir 1.12. Another feature requested by the community and actually contributed by the community is registry improvement. So in Absinthe and GraphQL, we have this idea of subscriptions, and you can have hundreds of thousands of subscriptions in the same node. So in order to use less memory in those cases, the registry module now supports the compressed option when you are creating the registry. So you can compress the tables and use less memory. And we are also adding like faster operations or faster lookups in some cases, like registry values tree, when you want to read the value for a given PID, a PID that you know about. Another feature also requested by the community and coming in Elixir 1.12, already in Elixir 1.12, is, so I briefly mentioned about Livebook before, which is a collaborative code, a collaborative interactive code notebook. So you can type documentation and you can type code all together. And one of the features that we added for this is a new function in the code module called cursor context. And this function receives some piece of code like representing, for example, a buffer for your text editor or some code in the terminal. and it's going to say, hey, you are in the middle of a function call, you are in the middle of a module definition. So the idea is that it's going to give you the context about the cursor so you can implement things like auto-completion. So when we added code cursor context, we changed the IX auto-completion to use this new function. And Livebook is also using this function too to provide like IntelliSense like auto-completion, as you can see in this screenshot. So another feature that I think is going to be very useful to the community too, and maybe other things like Elixir Sense and other integrations are going to use it too. All right, that's what I had to share with you today. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. All right, so I believe Luis or somebody is going to just jump. Oh, all right, he arrived.
Yeah. I'm here now. First of all, thanks. I know this is weird talking to the vacuum and not getting any response from the people and or applause or all that kind of stuff that you're used to in normal circumstances, but it's what we have. Okay, so we do have a few questions from the audience that I'm going to ask you. So the first one is, so when you talked about Mix.install, so where are those dependencies stored, was the question? Is it the build folder, memory, or somewhere else?
So great question. It's stored in your temp directory, the one that gets cleaned, I think, depending on your operating system. Yeah, so it starts off in temporary that eventually is going to be cleaned. There is also a environment variable that you can configure. And if you want to have it be in a separate directory, because there are some operating systems that clean things up very aggressively, like every time you boot, and maybe you don't want that. But yeah, it's all cached in a temporary directory that is meant to be, it's a directory your operating system knows that it's fine to clean from time to time, either when you ask it or when something else happens.
Cool. Okay, so we have a couple more questions related to features. So the first one is features planned for version 1.13. If you can reveal any of that.
Yeah, so all the features that we have planned there in our issues tracker. I'm going to open up the changelog here because we already have a couple of things. But yeah, if you want to look like, hey, what is planned? Like the list is there publicly. It's always public. But I think because we really don't have a lot of like planned features per se, like most of the things they are there in the language. Most things end up being contributions that somebody just does it out of nowhere, right? Or somebody proposes it and then we work on it. So for example, I think a lot of the features that I talk about today, they're not necessarily planned. Like Mix.install was not planned, even though it's probably, or stepped ranges. They just came up as we were working on the issues, or as somebody report the same issue for the 10th time, and they were like, okay, maybe we should now all put our collective minds and address it. But so what is there? Okay, so what is there already? So what can be on Elixir 1.13? It's in the issues tracker, but what is there already that is worth talking about? So there are a couple interesting things. So I was able to improve the compilation times in some specific scenarios. I was actually able to do that when Elixir 1.12 was still a release candidate, but because it's a large change, I didn't feel comfortable in adding it after the release candidate was out. But in some scenarios, maybe compilation times are going to be improved. The example that I have was when loading Elixir test suite. The time for loading the test suite went from 14 seconds to 9 seconds. So that's a very good compilation time improvement. I don't think it's going to be, everybody's going to have the same, okay? I don't think everybody's going to have like, 30% faster compilation times on the new version, but there are things in there. We have more improvements to IX auto-completion. So now we auto-complete paths if you are inside a string. So if you're inside a string and you say like dot and then the slash, we will understand that you are typing a path, and then we're going to auto-complete the paths based on where you are, which is really cool. The other feature, which is really nice as well, is This was a contribution. So in Elixir, we added the code formatter, I think in 1.6 or 1.7, and we have been slowly making when we added that, we added a bunch of like private functionality around the parser, the Elixir tokenizer to make it work. And we have slowly been making this functionality public, so everybody can use it, or people can create their own formatter. Like if you don't like our formatting rules, you can do your own. And with Elixir 1.13, we will have made everything public. So what it means that if you go to our code formatter module, it's going to be called other APIs from Elixir, and all the APIs that it's calling, it's public, which means you can copy and paste that module to a separate project, and it's not going to break between Elixir versions because everything's public API. And one consequence of that is that now, and there is a project called Sorcerer that's already exploring this, is that you should be able to make source-to-source transformation in Elixir. So for example, imagine that you want, some of the ideas that you're exploring, imagine that you want to do Mix.install that parses the Mix.access and add the dependency for you in there without removing the formatting. Actually, it will remove the format because it's going to run things through the formatter, but it will use the formatter format. And before that, it was not possible to do that. So you can do like now source-aware source to code transformations, which is a really nice improvement coming this release as well. And again, not planned. It's just somebody decided to work on it. But yeah, those are the main ones, and probably other ones are going to show up.
Awesome. Okay, also related to features, this is about Surface and live view, is if there's any plan, again, to incorporate more features from Surface into live view over time.
Yeah, that's precisely the plan. So we are starting with the template language, and we are going to focus on the template language for now. But the idea is to explore exactly, well, what does a like, can we have like typed assigns? I think Surface called them properties or data. So the idea is exactly to have like, well, can we bring Surface, the storybook, the catalog, I believe they call it. So the idea is exactly to start bringing a lot of the Surface features to live view, and also make sure that one of the views that Marlos has, who is the creator of Surface, and he's working on bringing those things to live view, is actually that if we can't bring something to live view, we still want to have the foundation in live view. So if people use Surface or there is another templating like language in the future, they can all share the same foundation. So for example, if you have a Surface component and then there's another library with their own components in the future, they can all interplay. So yeah, the idea is to bring the foundation and a lot of those ideas to live view.
I do have a couple questions myself. The first one, when you talked about the EP54, so that looks nice, the errors obviously, but would that make sense to add in our own library code? Could we do that already from?
Well, so your Elixir code, right? So, okay, let me rewind a little bit. So this comes from, so the way that Erlang code and Elixir code, they handle exceptions, it's very different, right? So in Erlang, when you have an error, typically what you do is that you raise a tuple, right? You're going to say, look, error badarg, or error badarg, and then you pass the value that is bad. So this has two issues in my mind, right? Which is, one is that it is very compact, right? Because you're raising like data types, you're raising something like, hey, it's a tuple that has a key and the value. It's not descriptive. You're giving, it's very concise, right? There's not a lot of information in there. And the other one is that when you're raising a tuple, right, it basically means that if somebody's catching that exception, and you imagine that you say, hey, I'm writing this Erlang library, and I'm raising a tuple badarg in the name of the value. Then somebody says, hey, it's not nice. I would like if you could include more information. Like, is it a badarg because it's not a tuple or something? Or because why is that a badarg? If you want to include more information, the only way that you can do it is by adding more elements to the tuples. which means that if anybody was catching or rescuing that tuple before, you're now going to break that code, right? So it's a very awkward place to be, because if you have bad error messages, because everything is wrapped around tuples, a lot of the things in OTP at least was wrapped around tuples because it exists for decades, right? You really don't have a lot of option to improve it, because without breaking other people's code. So this is the genius idea behind the AP54, which is to come up with a contract where they can add more information without changing those tuples and those return types. That's the idea, right? The reason why this doesn't matter for Elixir is because our exceptions, they are not tuples, right? Our exceptions, they are structs, which means they are maps, which means that we can add and remove keys. So when you are rescuing an exception, you're doing it based on the name of the exception, which means that we can add and remove keys. We have a contract already. So EP, you can think that EP54 is bringing the exception contract that we have to, it's the version of Elixir exception contract, but for Erlang. They are different, they're not the same, but it's kind of the same idea. So, but the points that the features, they are already there in Elixir. So, if you want to provide better error messages in your Elixir libraries, you will do raise argument error and write the argument error message with all the information that you want. So all those things, so it has been available for us. And now, there is a similar feature in Erlang as well, and we just integrated to it. And the cool thing is that talking about next Elixir version, is that in Elixir 1.13, we also improved. So if you are an Erlang developer and you're calling Elixir code, the Elixir exceptions, they're also now nicely formatted in the Erlang shell as well. So we are going kind of full circle. But yeah, in theory, you don't need to do anything for AP54. You don't have to change your Elixir code. You just continue raising Elixir exceptions, and you're good.
Got it. Cool. My last question is, so we've talked a lot about features and everything, but I would like to ask you, what's your vision for Elixir in the next few years? Not really just features, but as a community and in the industry, how do you see Elixir growing?
So this is, I will say, in my mind, what is the ideal path? Because I think it's really hard to say how I see it growing, because I think anybody who tries to predict about anything, they're going to ultimately be wrong. So, the work that we are doing, and this work has been happening for a while, if you go back to Elixir beginnings, Elixir was designed to be an extensible language, because we wanted developers to be able to get the language and adapt it to different areas, right? And I always say that the web aspect of Elixir was kind of an obvious one, because I came from a web background, and I think a lot of people following me, they came from a web background. So I think it was kind of for granted that Elixir would be good for doing web stuff. But my hope was that the language would be extensible enough and attractive enough that people would get it and bring it to other domains and other areas. So, and that's why some time ago I said that, the focus is no longer on Elixir, the language itself, right? Because the language was designed so the work can happen elsewhere and not on the language and not in the language. And I think that's the path that the community, and that we set ourselves on, to the point that, when you see a new Elixir release, the major features, they are not, nothing out of this world, right? The major feature I talk about today is Mix.install, which is literally a function. It's probably 20 lines of code, right? So it's not like we are, turning everything upside down, because the language is stable, and we're just supposed to be extending it, and that's the path we're on. So we start with web, and then we have Nerves, we have Broadway for data processing, we have Mainbrain for audio and video streaming, and now we are even starting with NX, numerical Elixir, and trying to bring Elixir to numerical computing, machine learning. So that's where I see the community going. I hope that we will continue to spread ourselves over different areas, different domains, and have a good experience with Elixir and try to solve all kinds of different problems.
Do you see people going? You talked about the Max, like going from the de facto standard, which is like Python, to Elixir. Do you see that migration happening?
I honestly, I'm not too worried about it. I'm not. I think that's in many ways. I think that's kind of unrealistic, right? It's like, I mean, it could happen, but I think it's unrealistic, and it's like, and it's not necessarily a health way to approach things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we are automatically setting ourselves to be. It's like, hey, can we be the best? Can we be the most used, most popular tool? And and most likely that the answer is going to be no, right? But I also think, like, if you set this standard for yourself, then it's likely you're setting for disappointment, right? It's like, is like my son telling me, like, hey, I'm going to be a chef, and then I'm like, hey, when you're going to be featured on the cover of the Michelin book, right? It's like, no, like, you can really be a very good chef on your own, right? And a lot of people is going to come to your restaurant, enjoy your food, be very, very happy without ever being featured on the book cover, right, of the Michelin book. So for me, it's the same. Like, I will be very happy going with the metaphor. Let me run away with it. It's like, if people come to our restaurant, eat our food, and have a really good time, right? So I say, like, even if we start hearing companies that that they are doing Elixir, and then they had to do some data science, machine learning, and they say, hey, I was going to use Python before, but now I no longer have to because I can stay with Elixir. For me, that's already it's already huge, right? Because yeah, right. Like, sure, we're not bringing anybody new over, but the fact that we can allow the community to continue reinvesting in itself, right, and continue growing, I think that's already really, really good. And then we'll see. And then from there on, we can think about next step. But I think I think having our own users using our tools, I think it will already be fantastic.
Cool. So again, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the talk and taking this time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope everybody's going to have a great event and conference. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.